guys, today we're going to be replacing the caliper, the brake pads, the brake hose, the rotor, and the bearings, the wheel bearings on this 93 Ford AEROSTAR. This should be the same from 86 to 97 for all the AEROSTARs in terms of the process on how to change these. So we're going to go through step-by-step process and show you guys how this is done.
Alright, so these are the tools we are going to be using for the brake job here. Obviously have a hammer, a punch, and a flathead screwdriver for the pins on the caliper. We have the C-clamp to compress the caliper. Of course we have some PV blaster there to help loosen everything up. Magnet dish so that we don't lose all of our little parts. We were using the 7/16 line wrench for the brake line, as well as a 14mm to get one of the other nuts off on the back side. Got needle nose and this 27mm socket to remove the retaining nut for the spindle, and I guess, you know, the retaining nut that holds the rotor in place. So those are the tools we're going to be using today. We'll let you know if there are any others we have to pull out.
Alright guys, so you're going to want to start by spraying some PB blaster on these two retaining pins in here, if I not hit the camera. Then there's one down here, spray in there, and then go ahead and hit the bolt holding the brake line onto the back of the caliper back here, get that soaked, and then up in there, since we're going to be replacing the brake hose, we're going to soak that nut up in there on the brake line so that helps break that free. Give that about 3 to 5 minutes to kind of work in there, and then we'll go ahead and break those free.
We also, if you're not going to be replacing the rotor, we suggest not getting too much of that stuff on the rotor.
Alright, after you let those soak, we're going to go ahead and take our 14mm and stick it back here on top of the bolt holding the brake hose onto the caliper. Make sure you're good and set on there, then you won't slip off. Then we're going to go ahead and break that free like that. If yours is a little bit more rusty or stiff, you might have to put a little bit more power into getting it off. Obviously, you're going to get brake fluid everywhere when you take this line off, so if you want to stick a bucket or a pan underneath, you can. For us, it doesn't matter because we're working above dry ground. Okay. Alright, so now that this is off, we're going to go ahead and up here and try to break this guy free up in here, this brake line up in here. So we're going to take our line wrench, 7/16 line wrench. It might be a different size for you, just have to find one that makes sure it works and doesn't strip it out. Obviously, it's pretty rusty up in here, so if we do break that, we're going to reflare the brake line. If you do break the brake line off, I would suggest looking up how to run a new brake line to do that, because we won't be showing that in this video. So when you go ahead and stick it on there, I would suggest, you're obviously going to be turning counterclockwise, take it off, just start slow, start wiggling it until you feel it break free like that. Wiggle it a little bit more to break those rust particles free so you don't twist it off or anything. And then go ahead and twist that, keep taking it off, like so. Alright. Once this gets popped up and out, guys, once you unscrew that, pop it out, there's a retaining clip right here. You're going to take your flathead. It's kind of a weird shaped clip. So what I'm going to do is going to take your flathead. There's a hole right here in the edge of the clip. You're going to stick your screwdriver in as far as you can. And then just kind of tilt it and rock it. And it will come off like that. That's the retaining clip that goes on. With that retaining clip off, this is now free, and that'll come down and out just like that. So there is your old crusty rubber brake line off. Alright guys, next we're going to be getting this caliper off. So you're going to need your C-clamp. Mine wasn't quite big enough, so it's going to be kind of on there at an angle. But you're going to want to stick your C-clamp in here, in between this caliper, in between the pad right here. You don't want it up on here on the caliper, because what we're going to be doing is pushing in with the clamp, pushing the piston back to loosen up that caliper. So I'm going to go ahead and stick this in here, stick this up in here at an angle sort of. Get this down some more. There it went. There we go.
The whole caliper just moved. Okay. That's what we're looking for. We're just looking to get everything broken loose a bit, and also to push the piston back. We're just trying to compress the piston to give us space.
So now that we did that, take our clamp back off. And now you can tell it's loose enough because your caliper's moving a bunch. So now, next we're going to be taking out
Pins.
my flathead. There's two retaining pins, like we said before. There's one on the top of the caliper, one on the bottom. So what you're going to be doing, you can see there's two little bumps on either side. You're going to try to basically just stick your screwdriver in here with your hammer and kind of tap one down to try to get it started. Work one end down, and then you're going to take your punch and stick that in here, and then they should come out. These are pretty rusty, so they're wanting to fight us a bit, but oh, there we go. So see how I got that in? Then you're going to keep shoving your punch through and not smash your hand with the hammer. And now we see we have the first retaining pin out. That's what they look like. They just slide in. And then obviously next one we're going to do the bottom one down here. If I can quit dropping my tools. It's cold out and my hands are numb.
It's only like 30 degrees and windy.
We're going to get that kind of pinned in with the screwdriver. And then try to get it out with that punch. Take this back out. It might take a few attempts. See, I just got that one. And that flew way over there.
Might not be able to see that in the camera, but you can kind of imagine it since we saw them.
So we got those two pins out. So now this is looser, obviously. So if your piston is all the way back, which sometimes on the other one are stuck, what I did before, I took my screwdriver, since we're replacing the piston, we're replacing the caliper anyways, so right here, I'm sticking my screwdriver in between the pad and the piston, and I'm pushing back, and that's loosening the piston up more and pumping brake fluid out of the caliper. You can see now it's more looser, and the whole thing should just come out just like that. Now there is a pad back here on the back right here. Not sure if you can see. It's just in there in the same shape the rotor is. That's going to wiggle right out because there's two slots back in here that it slides into. So with that off, we're going to go ahead and get ready to take the rotor off. Alright, next we're going to be taking this dust cap off. That's going to give you access to the retaining nut holding the rotor on. So you're going to take a flathead screwdriver and try to get started on the edge here and get it started. Might be a little difficult. It's very cheap metal.
So once you get it pulled out a little bit at one spot, you start working it around the other side there.
Keep rotating it. You just have to work it. It's a very chintzy cap. Yeah, see there? It's starting to come. So I'm going to turn it again and just keep working it. Tap in, pry out, like that. Spin it again, tap it in.
It's on its way.
Again. And there we go. Now obviously there should be some grease in there. Not much left and it's kind of dried out, so we're going to be replacing that. But next you're going to have access to there's a pin going through the stud here, holding on that one retaining nut. So you're going to take a pair of needle nose here. You're going to bend this pin down into a straight line so that you can get it out.
It's really dumb.
Okay, there we go. Now that it's straight enough, and mine's coming out easy, if you're having trouble getting it out, stick your needle nose in the hole up here and use your hammer I just kind of like tap up on it to get it out of the hole. Obviously mine's coming out easy. Well, it was.
Sorta.
There we go. We got the pin out, so we're going to stick that in our magnetic dish so we don't lose it.
Talking about said magnetic dish.
Put that in there, whatever. Alright, now you're going to have access to your, this is basically just a sheath castle nut that just slides right off like that. That's what just helps lock that nut into place. Now, these nuts are only supposed to be on finger tight, so if someone put it on too tight before, you might need an impact or a ratchet to take them off, but usually you can just stick your socket on and take your wrist or whatever and just break it free like that. Just came right off. Go ahead and take that off.
And usually they're right around 27 millimeter, which is what we're using.
There's the nut. Now behind there is going to be a washer, obviously, and the bearings right behind that. One of the bearings. It's a front bearing, so you're going to take your washer off. Stick that in the dish after you get it dirty on the ground. And then you'll have your bearing to come out. Now, the whole rotor, you can pull the rotor out and let your bearing kind of come off at the end of your hand like that. So you put your bearing in your dish. Whole rotor will come off like this. Now, your rear rotor and your rear seal is in here. If you are replacing your rotor and it does not come with this rear seal, and you need to pop this seal and bearing out, here's how you do this. You put this back onto the spindle.
Carefully.
Yes, carefully.
So you don't damage the spindle threads.
And you take your nut that we took off.
That we have buried in here.
So you put the nut that you had back on there. Well, you might need the washer. But basically the goal of that, if you want to, you can stick your washer behind that, but you thread this on a few threads. You take your rotor, pull it up, and you pull it as hard as you can, straight off, and it'll pop the seal and the bearing right out on the back perfectly fine.
Now, we are not replacing our rotor at the moment, and we are not replacing the bearings. We're just going to be re-greasing the bearings and cleaning the rotor up really good, just because we don't feel like spending a few $100s on rotors. So we're going to be cleaning these up instead of replacing them, but the rest of the brake stuff we'll be definitely replacing. So we'll show you how everything goes back together here in just a minute. Alright, so these are the parts and tools that we're going to be using for reinstall. We're using the same rotor and the same bearings, but obviously if you guys are replacing those, you would have new ones, and they'll go on the same way that we'll show you how we're putting these old ones back on. So we have all the old parts we took off here that we're reusing. Have brake cleaner for the rotor. We have grease for the bearings. Still have the same tools like the 27mm flathead, 14mm on our ratchet, 7/16 line wrench, and then our hammer. We have our new caliper and pads. We have sandpaper here. If you want to, you can very lightly go over the pads with some sandpaper around the edges to get any burrs off from factory. And then we do have our caliper grease here, and that will just put on all the contact points, not the pad part, but all the side contact points where the pads will be running along the caliper and caliper bracket, just so they run smoothly. We have our new brake hose here. So we'll go over our reinstall process with you here in just a second.
Alrighty, so obviously you're going to have your rotor. Let's say that you don't have your bearings or your rear seal installed yet. So what we're going to do here is you're going to have two bearings. One of them is going to be much bigger than the front one. So you see how this rear one is substantially massive compared to the front bearing. Now, let's say these are both out of here. Let's pretend this is your rear bearing. What you're going to do is take a bunch of grease from over here in your grease container. I might as well grease this up now because this will be the front. You're going to take grease, rub that in all the little ball bearings and crevices on this bearing and get that really nice and greased up on both sides. If you want to wear gloves, feel free. If not, it's not going to hurt you to get your hands greasy. So let's say you have your rear bearing greased, it is going to go in with the tapered side down, so your larger side is going to be facing up. You're going to stick your rear bearing, pretending this is the rear bearing, straight down into the pocket here to where it sits in there. And then what you're going to do, you'll have your seal, if you had that popped out, this seal, it's going to look like a flat, sort of like an O-ring. You're going to take your seal and put it directly on top, and then what you're going to do is take a rubber mallet, or what we got over here. So let's pretend this is the seal right here. If your seal's sitting here, you're going to take your rubber mallet and tap that in. And you might have to use a regular hammer or just tap it lightly in. Or you could even try greasing the lip on the underside of the rubber seal to help it slide in better. But you just center it with the top of the rotor hole here over your bearing after you put it in. And you just tap that in until it's flush with the top here. And then that's how you get your rear bearing and this rear seal in there. Alright, so now that your rear bearing is in and your rear seal is in, you're going to obviously see your spindle over here. This obviously still has some leftover grease on it, which isn't exactly very clean or nice anymore. So I'm going to wipe some of that off with my finger here. But you're going to take your grease, you're going to get a dollop on your finger, and you're going to smear that all over the spindle here. Get that nice and greased up for that rotor to go on there. A little bit more than that. You can be generous with the grease. So now that's all greased up. We're going to take your rotor, obviously the rear end first. You're going to carefully put that over the end of the spindle, up and on, and push it all the way back as far as it'll go. And then just hold that there for a sec. It should stay there. Now, you're going to have your front bearing. Now, like I showed you before, you're going to, obviously your front bearing, take your grease, put that in all the little crevices and the pockets on the bearing, like I already did on this one. And it's obviously going to go tapered side in first. Tapered side in, goes straight in over the spindle, push it back in until it seats in there like that, and then it's in. So now what you'll be doing is taking your nut and your washer. Your washer only goes on one way, so obviously you can see the tapered edge on the washer. You're going to stick that on the only way it goes on. Then you're going to take your nut and go ahead and thread that on. Then you're going to get the socket you had earlier. Take your socket or your pliers or wrench or whatever you're using, put that on here and tighten that till you're about hand or finger tight, whichever you prefer. Then you're going to take your little sheath castle nut and stick that over back onto your nut. Obviously you want your hole to be centered with the, you want to be able to access your hole with the pin here. Mine's a little bent there, and I'll fix that with the flathead quick. So I'm pushing that tab back without stabbing myself, preferably. There we go. Okay. So that's on. I had to bend that tab back because mine was bent. But if you put that on, you should be lined up with your hole. If you are not lined up with your hole, you might have to just loosen that nut back there just a hair to get it to line up here. So then you're going to take your pin that we took out before. Might be a little bit tricky getting those guys lined up in there. So what you'll have to do is take your needle nose and you can try to like squeeze it together and get it started in there. And maybe take your hammer at the same time, squeeze that end in, and maybe give it a little bit of a tap with your hammer and get it started in. There we go. So now I'm trying to go through. Alright, see there, I just got it through. So hammer that all the way down in where it was before. Obviously make sure the pin is centered and in there correctly. Otherwise it won't want to go through. Alright, so now I'm all the way through because the pin's all the way down. So take your needle nose and bend these guys back up the way they were, out of the way of your dust sleeve. That obviously holds the sheath on, as long as they're bent up out of the way. Alright, now you're going to need your dust sleeve. Alright, so you're going to have your dust sleeve and your rubber mallet now. Now, what you want to do is always take a dollop of grease from your grease container. Just take that dollop of grease, put that in there. That helps keep, I'll get a little more than that. That helps keep that greased in there, helps it not dry out as much. So obviously, get your dollop of grease in there, get that lined up on your hole here. Get started, and then take your rubber mallet, and you should be able to just get it all tapped in and on until that's back and flush. If you're having trouble, you can use a regular hammer, but be very careful because these caps are very flimsy and you could dent them easily. So if you have to use a regular hammer, I suggest light taps like that. Don't be smacking the crap out of it, or you're going to be buying a new dust sleeve. So now that the rotor is on, we can go on and move on to the caliper and the brake hose. Alright guys, so next we're going to be taking your rear caliper pad that goes on the rear inside of the rotor and putting that on. That is obviously the one that does not have the pegs on the back, because that one snaps onto the rotor. I'll show you how to put that on. So the one that does not have the metal tab on the back. So you're obviously, if you prefer, which we sometimes do, we sometimes not do, you take some sandpaper and just lightly take it over the pad to get rid of any little burrs that might be there from factory. And then you'll take this, obviously make sure it is going the same way the rotor is. There's going to be 2 tabs back in here. Alright, there is going to be 2 notches back here. You can see that top notch right there, and there's a bottom notch right here. I got to pick that up and get it into. You're going to take and line that up with those notches, like so. Like I just did. So it's going to be sitting in those notches, just like that. You might have a little resistance in case you have some rust there. Just kind of tap it in with your hand. Now I'll show you how to get the brake line hose on the caliper. Alright, so now you're going to take your caliper that obviously goes in your driver's side, because we're doing the driver's side right now. Now keep in mind, if you're getting new brake line hoses, they specifically are either for the driver's side or passenger side, so try to find out which one you have based off of the length it is or the way it was turned or whatever. Some of these new ones you have to kind of manipulate and twist because they don't exactly make them the right way from factory. So you're going to be taking your, obviously your 14mm bolt that was going through this with one of your, I guess, pressure washers or whatever they're called through here. You're going to stick your other one through here. Alright, so obviously we're putting this on first because you're going to have to twist and manipulate that line a little bit, but you see this ledge up here, how it's like an L, that's going to go facing this way. I'll give you an overhead shot here whenever get it, or finger tight. Alright, so you see the way the top ridge comes up, and obviously there's our bleeder nipple right there. That is the way that sits in, according to that, coming up like that. So we can go ahead and tighten this a little bit more with your 14mm, just to get that some snug for now. Alright, so next we're going to be flipping this over to this way, so your piston is facing down. We're getting the other brake pad. These are very easy. Obviously, take your sandpaper again, you can scuff that up, get any burrs off you think you see or feel. And that is going to be going on like this, because that is the way that it is going with the rotor. Just make sure you don't put them on backwards. You'll be able to tell if you put them on backwards because they won't line up correctly. But it just pops on straight in like that. They just pop up right over there, and that holds it there for you. So you'll be taking your caliper, getting this guy kind of the piston's going to go over the other pad back there. You should have enough room because it's already decompressed. I'm just going to wiggle the caliper back into place where it kind of was here. And you obviously see how we have some space here. Oh, there we go. So there it went in all the way. So your gap needs to look similar to this so we can get the new clips back in. We can go ahead and get this clipped in now before we finish the hose.
Right before that, we might want to put on a little bit of brake grease. Might want to get some brake grease on those rails.
Oh. So we're going to be taking some of this brake grease. We'll stick some in here for those pins to go through. That way they don't rust and seize in there. There's not really much surface area on this design of caliper for the grease. On most normal ones, you have rails that the pads travel on that you would grease these upper rails. Similar to this, obviously. We'll stick a little bit on there so it goes back in, and then obviously the one under here. Don't get this on your rotor or you're not going to be able to stop. That would be bad. So we got a little bit of braking caliper grease on there just for those pins. So you're going to be taking your new pins. We're going to start with the lower one because on the other side, when we did the other side, I put the top one in first and it made the bottom one a huge pain because of how tight it was. So you really should just need a hammer, and they only go in one way, or well, they can go in multiple ways because they're the same on either side. So get some room here. Just smashed my head to the mic. So down here, you're going to see this hole right here. You got to get these lined up in here. So what you kind of have to do is pivot this in at a slight angle and start tapping to try to get that to start. And it's going to take a few attempts to get that in like that. Okay, so there I just got it in, hammer it all the way in until it gets back to those notches, and then it stops, and then it's in. So there we got our bottom one in. Probably a little bit more. There we go. So back to where those notches touch the caliper bracket. And now we have access to our top one. So you'll take your other new pin, obviously, and you'll try to pivot that in. It's just so much easier to be able to work on the top. So you're going to try to get that started just like that. Mine went in much easier. It's easier to work on the top. Get that guy hammered in. All the way. If you want to, you can use a punch if your hammer won't really get in there. But back to where those tabs obviously meet the caliper bracket again, and then your caliper is seated in there properly. And now we have our brake hose. Now, if you'll notice, there is like a hexagon shape, pentagon shape, whatever you want to call it. There is a rounded edge on the top here, right here. That rounded edge is facing towards the engine bay, so you're going to have to twist and manipulate it just a little bit to where you can get that lined up, and it'll go right through for you like that. Now, that's through the hole for you. So you'll take your bracket, your very rusty bracket that you took off before. If you end up breaking these when you take them off or when you go to put them back on, these should be pretty standard brackets. You should be able to go to AutoZone or somewhere and be able to get these. So you're always going to take your open end on the bottom where these two pegs are, and you're going to line them up. You're going to shove your hose up through to where you can see that little lip. You're going to start on that little lip. You should be able to push it on with your finger to get it started. And then you can take your hammer and tap that on the rest of the way. And just like that, that is in. It's got a little bit of a wiggle too, but the clip's pretty old. And then you have your brake line here, which you stick in right like that. Then you should be able to start threading that in by hand. Might take a few attempts because sometimes they're stupid and don't want to go in. But I got that one started. And then you'll take your 7/16 line wrench, and then you can get that go ahead and get that screwed in. Alright guys, so at this point we have our brake line tightened into our brake hose, which is held in with the clip coming down to the caliper, which we have properly tightened into the caliper. There's no torque specs for that. Obviously you just tighten it till it feels pretty tight. Now obviously our caliper's held in with the two pins. Now you would obviously bleed your brakes because you're replacing the caliper and the pads, and all that fluid would have drained out. If you're going to bleed the brakes, which you should and will need to, I would suggest having a second person to help you pump the brakes and bleed them, or if you have one of those auto brake bleeder systems, you can use that as well. We will not be showing you how to bleed your brakes in this video to save time, obviously. We might do a video like that in the future, but I suggest looking up a YouTube video on how to do that and having a second person help you, because it's much easier. So, that being said, hopefully everything has gone smooth for you. Hopefully this video was helpful, and if you notice that we missed anything or would like to leave a comment, be sure to let us know. If the video helped you, please subscribe and like the video. That would really help us out. So I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll try to make more how-to videos for these different vehicles in the future. Have a good one.